Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about matchups for Red-Black Scam, which is by a lot the most popular deck in Modern at the moment. I'm going to go over the top 10 most popular decks, give you my thoughts over whether I think this is a good matchup, bad matchup, even, leaning, good or bad, and if there's any nuances in the matchup to point out. This isn't meant to be a deep dive, but just a look into each one of the matchups if you're looking to pick up the deck or if you're looking to master the deck. So let's jump into it. The most popular deck is the mirror match. And obviously matchup doesn't matter in the mirror match because it's just a matchup. Now, generally the mirror match goes to the late game, and I'm not interested in throwing away cards. And you really shouldn't be looking to 2-for-1 yourself. For example, if you can only kill one creature with a Fury, unless that creature is super important to kill, you probably don't want to do it. That being said, Ragavan isn't great in the matchup because of Bowmasters, and there's just so many ways to answer it. And the scam cards lose a lot of stock if your opponent has a lot of graveyard hate like Leyline of the Void or Unlicensed Hearse. The Ragavan's obviously better than the scam cards, especially on the play if they have a lot of Leyline. The scam cards get a lot of value back if there's not a lot of graveyard hate. The next matchup I want to talk about is the 4-color Omnath deck. Now this is actually a leaning bad matchup, maybe even considered a bad matchup, somewhere in between the two. Now the perspective on this matchup has changed since Up the Beanstalk has been released. Because if the game goes long, Omnath is just going to outcard you, and that's how it works. So we need to be trying to kill them. There's a lot of play with Ragavan. When you're on the draw, it's really important to remember Renin 6 exists. And sometimes it's even important to hold on to the Ragavan and just plan on dashing it during the games, so they can't just 1-for-0 you. And turn 5 is a huge, really scary catch-up turn for them, where they can either jam a Retail Solitude, a Retail Fury, or an Omnath and be able to do both with a fetch land. So leaving up a Terminate or a good removal spell for their turn 5 is super important. And if you're playing Fatal Push, it's very important to hold up your fetch land so you can trigger Revolt. The next most popular deck is Rhinos, which I actually think is a pretty even matchup. And as far as some nuances with this, sometimes you want to save the Fury Scam so you can clear the first set of Rhinos. And if you're playing Chalice of the Void and Engineered Explosives, it's important to remember that they're kind of non-bows with each other, in that if you have Chalice on the battlefield and then you tried to EE for 0, because you do it for 0 so you can clear the Rhinos, Chalice will counter it, and vice versa. If you have a Chalice on the battlefield and an Engineered Explosives on the battlefield for 0, and then you pop Engineered Explosives, it'll also kill the Chalice. They're both very good against the deck, so I still think you bring both in, but it's important to be cognitive of it. Next up is Yawgmoth, which is one of our good matchups as a scam player. And especially now that they're playing Soul Cauldron, Graveyard Hate gets a lot better against them, because it was only fine with the Undying creatures before. Now with Soul Cauldron, very good. And this is another deck that once they set up, it's really hard to beat, so we really need to focus on being as aggressive as possible, because if we pressure their life total, they can't really get too much value with Yawgmoth. Next is Amulet Titan, which is also, I think, a good matchup, or at least leaning good. And this is definitely a matchup where you need to make sure you mulligan to Disruption and Pressure so that they aren't able to get their combo off, because if we don't have Disruption, then they're just going to combo us because they're faster than us. And if we don't have Pressure, then they can draw into what they need anyway, even if we have Disruption, because there's a lot of redundancy in the deck. Next up is Murktide, which I think is a pretty even matchup, but I think is really heavily dependent on the players, because as a scam player, it's really important we pressure their mana and make it difficult for them to counter our stuff, because once they set up, they control us pretty well. And threatening Bowmaster can make them think twice about what they do. And leaving up mana for Bowmaster, especially if you get one off in response to a cantrip or something like that, is disgusting. The burn matchup, I think we're a little unfavored, only very slightly though. And this is another matchup that is important that we have a lot of disruption and pressure. Also, the Grief Scam is only fine in the matchup. It gets burn spells out of their hands, so if we have Grief Scam and other pressure, very good. But nearly every card in their deck answers the Grief Scam, so that they can draw out of it pretty well, so we can't be keeping hands that it's just the Grief Scam and we try our best. Next up is Hammer Time, which I also think is a pretty even matchup. And the big discussion here of whether Blood Moon is worth it or not, especially since a lot of the more recent Hammer Time lists are mono white. I think it still is because of Urza Saga. For those that you don't know, if you cast Blood Moon and there's an Urza Saga on the battlefield, because of weird Saga rules, it immediately goes to the graveyard. And this is another matchup that we need some levels of disruption, but removal actually counts as disruption. Next up is Hardened Scales, which is definitely a bad matchup, and I think that's why Hardened Scales is getting more popular. And I like to treat this matchup sort of like the Hammer Time matchup. It's important we have disruption and pressure, or they're just able to totally combo us. And it's important to kind of overvalue removal in our deck, because they often need multiple cards and multiple creatures to kill us. And lastly is Tron, which is a very good matchup, and another matchup where mulliganing to pressure and disruption is very important. And remember, if you have a Dothy Voidwalker and then get a payoff out of your opponent's hand, you can then cast that payoff and you're the Tron deck now. Now, if you like this brief matchup analysis, please be sure to like and subscribe and let me know in the comments. Also, check out social medias, so Twitter, Discord, links are above me and in the description. And please check out the Patreon, where there's a bunch of sideboard guides and other awesome stuff where I'm trying to make you a better Magic player. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.